If you've clicked on this video, then I'm guessing spamming lateral raises didn't work. We've all heard the same sentence before.
Delts are the most aesthetic muscle group, bro.
If you ain't got big delts, your dad is beating you with the belt. Okay, that was cringe, but your delts still played the biggest role when it comes down to how you present your physique. Having big shoulders actually gives you an appearance of looking jacked because your shirt stays on top of the rear delt and doesn't give you that slope appearance. And remember guys, women only look for two things: your shoulder circumference and your Brawl Stars account. And since we're no geeks here, I'm gonna teach you how I'm trying to get big shoulders, and I hope you can get some useful information as well. So the shoulder is made up from 3 different heads that each have their own function. Wrong! This is where most people fuck up already. This virtual separation onto 3 different parts, and before I explain, let me give you some context. So the deltoid got its name by the Greek letter delta, and it's only one muscle group of the shoulder, like the rotator cuff complex. It originates in 3 different points and inserts on our upper arm, aka the humerus. This is why the front, side and rear segments exist. But the catch is, we're not actually wired that way. There are at least 7 different components of the deltoid, each wired independently to the CNS. Your body doesn't really care whether you think you're training your rear delts on the pec deck. The only thing it cares about is getting the fiber with the most leverage to produce the most force, aka neuromechanical matching. This is the same reason why you're not gonna activate some posterior fiber when you're doing shoulder press. The posterior fibers don't have any leverage to act upon the given force. The actions it's used for are shoulder flexion, extension, abduction, and horizontal extension, and all the different planes in between those. One more thing about anatomy, the delt works synergistically with other muscles of the scapula, forming the scapulohumeral rhythm. This is a concept where your brain is constantly micromanaging the position of your humerus and your scapula and tries to sync them in a way that is best for your body to produce force against the load. So for example, if I adduct my arm for about 120 degrees of shoulder abduction, I'm creating a 2-to-1 ratio between the movement of my scapula, which is around 40 degrees, and my humerus, which is about 80. So every time your humerus moves, the scapula is also moving. However, this ratio is not always the same in every position, but just keep that in mind because I'm gonna touch on it later. Now let's talk about programming. The thing about the delts that kinda gets tricky is the volume, because we don't really know how to measure it properly compared to other body parts. The standard 10 to 20 sets a week is solid, but in reality, we should really be looking for volume in a specific motion. Let me ask you this. Would you be counting your incline dumbbell press for rear delt volume because you're training your front delts? I think not. They are the same muscle group, so on paper, you're looking at rear delt stimulation as well, but we all know that's not true. We're approaching this problem by looking at all the different motions the delt can produce. Firstly, there's always going to be overlap between the front and side and rear and side fibers because of the nature of the deltoid. Now let's take this reverse pec deck and compare it to a over-the-body lateral raise. If I tilt this one a little bit, you can see that they're not that different of a motion. What is different is the magnitude of stimulus that each fiber gets from one of those exercises. The lateral raise will mostly stimulate the side fibers, while the reverse pec deck will mostly stimulate the rear. However, the only thing that truly matters is the force that acts upon the shoulder in a particular position. I know these sound like some big words, but just keep in mind: 1. Train every motion of the delts at least twice a week. 2. Start around 8 sets per segment and move up from there if you're recovering. And 3. The 5 to 30 rep range will equal the same muscle growth, but from a practical standpoint, I'd go for 5 to 10 only for shoulder presses and keep the 10 to 20 for different rear delt and side delt isolations. Also, don't go below 8 reps for isolations because you're really sacrificing the stiffness of the form and increasing the chances of it breaking down. Because of the nature of these exercises, you can go much more intensely, training from 2 to 0 reps in reserve. Also, if you're not an outlier, then you probably don't need to do any shoulder press because your front delts are probably big enough. I just do shoulder presses because I think they're fun. Okay, so how about exercise selection? Probably the most underestimated aspect from the gym bros and the most overhyped aspect from the science nerds. On the fundamental level, the exercise you're doing really just has to fit 2 criteria. 1. Bring the target muscle to failure without anything failing before, not cause any joint pain or discomfort during execution. As you can see, it's not that deep, but it's still worth it going into the nuances. For example, we all know that training muscles at their longer length results in more hypertrophy, so we should keep the biggest chunk of our exercises as the ones that load that stretch position. for side delts is going to be a cable raise set at hip height, a lying on the side variation, and a machine variation with a good resistance profile being the hardest at the bottom and descending at the top. As for the shortened position, a standard variation with the dumbbells will work just fine. So as I said before, your front delts should be pretty damn developed already, so there is really no point of doing any kind of shoulder press except for the side delts, which in my opinion is still not the best idea. You could get more bias by limiting the range of motion to only the bottom position, because that's where the side delts actually have the most leverage compared to the top. Again, I don't think it's worth it because you have so many better options to train the side delts. So in my opinion, if you're not running low on time, there are much better options with better specificity than a shoulder press, which will all target the lateral and medial head of the tricep, the side delt, and the upper chest way better than shoulder presses can. So for rear delts, you've got three main options. First, any type of pull down will involve them to a certain extent. If you want to make it more biased, however, you could limit the range to only the top position, which is where the rear delts actually have the best leverage to extend the shoulder compared to the lower degrees of shoulder extensions where the lat is predominantly in activation. Secondly, any type of row in the transverse plane will work perfectly because you're extending the shoulder in a horizontal manner, and the rear delt actually has very good leverage throughout the entirety of the range of motion. In fact, they're so dominant, don't be afraid to go out of your way and protract on different exercises. For example, a single arm reverse pec deck like this. Isolating the rear delt is actually very simple, but most people still fuck it up because there's so much misinformation on the internet about people telling you to hold your scapula in retraction or keep it protracted or keep it still. As I mentioned before, the scapulohumeral rhythm is the system that dictates how well you can produce force, and if you constantly try to micromanage it, you're gonna create a worse position for you to produce force, in turn get smaller rear delts. In short, your brain knows where the scap should be to produce maximum force, so only worry about wrists and elbows when doing any type of motion. The rest will be taken care of by itself. Decent rear delt isolations, for example a reverse cable fly, a reverse pec deck, and a rear delt fly with a bench lying on the side. And to finish off, we've got exercise order. This is as important, if not more, than exercise selection, because depending how early you place your delt work in a given session, the better stimulus for growth the muscles are gonna get. The general rule of thumb is to do the compound lift first, but in our case, where we're trying to bring up our shoulders, it goes against us because we're really not prioritizing and putting them in the back of the program. You can do what I do and program them before my chest and biceps work, because that's where I'm the most fresh and have the best ability to create maximal stimulus for my side delts. Okay, we've got that out of the way, but how about different exercises for the same muscle group? Well, the thing to pay attention here is the strength curve of a given exercise. In general, you want to perform the more shortened position work first, because training muscles in their shorter position gives out less of a muscle damaging effect, and in turn still leaves you with the ability to train them in a longer position. So if we have a dumbbell iron raise and a machine variation with the resistance profile being the hardest at the bottom, you're gonna wanna place the dumbbell variation first, because you're not gonna affect the performance on the machine later on. Compared if you swapped the order, where you would first do the machine and then the dumbbell, you would then suffer much more on the dumbbell variation, because the machine created so much more muscle damage that will in turn leave you much more fatigued and unable to produce maximal stimulus. In other words, order your exercises in a way to produce minimum fatigue while still reaching maximal effective stimulus. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful in any way, shape or form. So that was all from me. Before you go, consider liking, subscribing and sharing this video to a friend who also has small delts. And until next time, see you guys.